So Mark, we're in the middle of our Foundations series, so I'm going to hand to you for the reading and to kick us off.
Yeah, so our Bible reading today, and you might want to have a look at this. If you've got your Bibles, you might want to turn to it now, is from Isaiah 44. And I'm going to read verse 13, and the words will come up on the screen as well if you want to follow along. So Isaiah 44, and beginning to read at verse 13. Then the woodcarver measures a block of wood and draws a pattern on it. He works with the chisel and plane and carves it into a human figure. He gives it human beauty and puts it on a little shrine. He cuts down the cedars. He selects the cypress and the oak. He plants the pine in the forest to be nourished by the rain. He goes on. He then uses part of the wood to make a fire. With it, he warms himself and bakes his bread. Then, yes, it's true, he takes the rest of it and makes himself a god to worship. He makes an idol and bows down in front of it. He burns part of the tree to roast his meat and keep himself warm. He says, that fire feels good. And then he takes what's left and makes his god, a carved idol. He falls down in front of it, worshiping it and praying to it. Rescue you, he says. You are my God. It's quite an interesting little reading, and it's written thousands of years ago, and it's all about worship, and it's all about how we can make things to worship, and that's part of what we're looking at this morning, isn't it, Darren? And so as part of our preparation, I've been reading through this little book, The Air I Breathe by Louis Giglio, and he asked some very interesting questions about worship and about what it means to be a worshipper. And I want to kick off with a little question that I want to pose to you, Darren, and maybe you can pick us up from there. So this question is going to come on the screen. One of the things that Louis Giglio says in that book, he says, we all worship something. And here's a question. We all worship something. And maybe for you at home, and I'm going to ask Darren this question, would you agree? Would you agree with that statement that we all worship something?
My feeling on that is that it's not the word or the phrase that typically comes to mind or that we would normally use. Outside of a church or a religious or faith context, worship tends to be used either ironically or to denote exaggeration. Like, for example, I could say that I worship Wycombe Wanderers FC. And great shirt, Joshua, by the way. And I would be mostly speaking in jest, although Joe Jacobson's left foot is pretty well miraculous. But there are things that we're dedicated to. There are things that we're devoted to. There are things we fill our lives with. And those are different words, really, and different ways of describing things that we worship, even if we don't really normally think about them like that. And we might not always be conscious of what they are. In fact, if we don't make active choices about those things that we're dedicated to, that we're devoted to, that fill our lives, the likelihood is that other stuff fills their place. None of us would say that we worship Netflix or that we worship social media or football. Of course we wouldn't say that. But if we don't make an active choice about the things that we fill our lives with, then we'll all default to something.
So that's an interesting way of putting it, Darren, that if we haven't made a choice, we'll default to something in our lives. There'll be something in our lives that we worship, but it might not be a choice. It might be something we've just fallen into. And so that leads us really to this next question and a quote, really, and that is, so how do we know what it is we worship? And again, here's a question that you might want to think about at home. So how do you know where and what you worship? And in that book, Louis Giglio goes on to say, well, to find out the answer to that question, it's really easy. And this is what he goes on to say. You simply follow the trail of your time, energy, affection, and money. And on that, you find a throne. And whatever or whomever is on that throne is the object of your worship. What strikes me with that little quote, Darren, is the fact that there's a trail that indicates where or who we worship. Right. It's money, time, energy, affections, and all those things. If I follow those through, I say, actually, there is something at the end of that trail, and that, at the end of that trail, is what we worship. And so what's your take on that, and what does that mean for you as you've been reflecting on that little thought?
Yeah, it feels the same to me. I mean, the phrase that came to my head was follow the investment. Right? Yep. Which is what the start of that quote really says. It's not just about what we spend our money on, it's what we spend our time on, it's what we think about, it's where our energy goes. And the other way is to think about what we talk about, have a listen to ourselves, what's on our lips. Those are the two ways that we can find out what the things are that dominate our lives. A little while ago, Laura, my lovely wife Laura, and I went to a concert. A musician known as Jason Mraz. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's an American guitar-based musician, brilliant. And we, Sasha loves it. I can see her out the corner of my eye. It was terribly romantic, I've got to tell you. I organised a surprise, took Laura out for a meal, we went around the corner to the Hammersmith Apollo, and the concert was everything you want it to be. He was amazing, the music's fabulous. For weeks after that concert, we couldn't stop talking about it. The music was on, he was on wherever we were, we played, and we went on holiday about a week afterwards, and we insisted the music was played constantly. We couldn't stop going on. I mean, we were Jason Mraz bores, right? Everyone heard about it. About 3 weeks after, I actually did a talk at Roots, and part of my presentation, I had a Jason Mraz lyric on a slide. And I think I actually said out loud, I was in danger of worshipping at the altar of Jason Mraz. And it was a joke at the time, but I was just conscious that it was filling my life. It was the thing that was on my lips. It was where a load of my energy was going. And we've all got something, right? Phil loves pianos. Oh, he's dedicated his life to pianos, as Phil. He loves them. Ben, what's it for you? What fills your life? What are you dedicated to? Lego. Teaching. Teaching for Ben. Very good. And Lego. I mean, his house is filled, or it was filled with Lego. Mark? Well, what fills your life?
For me, actually, since setting up all this stuff, tech, I'm always looking at what's the next tech, how do I upgrade? And me and David James will have quite a few conversations about, even this morning, I've just got this little gadget, maybe that'll make things work a bit better.
And TV shows, right? For you and I, we get in a room together, within about 2 minutes, 37 seconds, we are saying, have you watched that? You know, what's the latest show that you should binge on Netflix, right? These things fill our lives. So they're not necessarily things that are unhelpful or unhealthy. We might be devoted to our families, to our partners or our children or our close friends. We might be devoted to our work. Ben's example of teaching, especially if your job is meaningful and fulfilling, that might be the thing that fills our lives. It might be something that is healthy and gets us outdoors. Laura, my wife, got an allotment this year back in January, and she has put some hours into that allotment. But that's a good thing, right? I mean, it's literally vegetables. So that can't be unhealthy. The produce of that allotment goes in my belly. And at the moment, it's a really positive thing. We'll see, by the way, whether it continues to be so, because next year, I suspect Laura will want to be going for the Allotmenteer of the Year award. That's a thing. And she's going to go at it. So we'll just see how obsessive that becomes. But so these things don't have to be and aren't necessarily unhealthy or unhelpful, but sometimes they might be, right? Sometimes they might be workaholic or workaholism. That's not a good word if we've allowed that to dominate. Sometimes it might be love of money, perhaps the acquisition of money. Just everything in the way we are is set to get as much wealth as we can. It might be ourselves. We might just have built our life so that it revolves around us. We are the center of it. I don't know if you noticed that reading. It's in quite extreme terms. The guy carves a thing out of wood and worships it. But essentially, if you read what it's about him being pleased with what he's done, pleased with himself. If you look at the latter few verses, what does it say? He takes some of the wood, he makes a fire, he has a barbecue, and he finishes eating his roast meat, and he's satisfied. He's so satisfied with what he's done. He's warm, his belly's full, he's delighted with the work of his own hands, so much so that, in the words of the reading, he worships it, but effectively he's worshipping himself. And then we could talk about full-on addictions. I mean, I don't need to go through a list, but they are by definition unhelpful and unhealthy. But the thing of it is, it doesn't matter if the things that fill our lives, that we're devoted to, that we're dedicated to, are unhelpful or unhealthy, or helpful and healthy. If they become, whichever way they are, all-consuming, that's what can become problematic.
So Darren, that's really helpful to say that we all worship something, and we follow that trail of our time, our affection, our money, the things that we talk about, and that will show us what we worship. And some may be quite positive, but some may be harmful. But there's a final little nuance to that. And again, here's a final little statement that we might want to think about at home. And here it is. And you said this, Dan, whether good or bad or indifferent, the things that fill our lives also shape us. Whether good, bad or indifferent, the things that fill our lives also shape us. And Darren, there's something in the sense that if we've allowed something to consume our affection, our time, our energy, it actually is not a neutral thing. There is some way that actually begins to affect and change us. And again, do you want to finish this little conversation to say, well, what does that look like and what does that mean for us?
Right. I mean, how could they not, right? How could they not affect us in the first place? Because if we're devoting our time and our energy and our money to them, there's going to be a reflection back on us. There's going to be a time where they start affecting us. They start affecting the way we talk. They start affecting the way we think. They start affecting the very people we are fundamentally. And that's true of whatever those things are. So it's probably a good idea for us to do a regular MOT, a checkup every now and then to work out what are those things in our lives that we are dedicated to, devoted to, the things that fill our lives, the things that we worship. And are we okay with that? And once we've worked out what they are, if we want God in the mix, we're probably going to have to make an active choice. I think for most people, we wouldn't accidentally find ourselves devoted to God. Some people may be. If you've had a long relationship with him, if it's become second nature, then maybe that's true. You do just default to having God in your life, and that's brilliant. But for a lot of people, it will have to be an active choice to have God as even one of those things that fill our lives, let alone the biggest thing. So the question we wanted to consider this morning, and we'll reflect on for a minute or two now, is who or what do I want to worship? Who or what do I want to worship? Because we all have the opportunity to make that choice. And as we've been discussing, if we don't make that decision, it'll effectively be made for us. And the consequences of that decision we make of who we want to fill our lives, who we want to be devoted to, who we want to be dedicated to, or what, the consequences of that ongoing daily decision will have a massive and all-changing effect on our lives.
Darren, thank you so much. And what I'm hearing, we all worship something, and what we worship changes us. So that's a significant choice that we get to make, because what we worship changes. And so we're going to have a chance now to just have a moment to reflect on that. And Phil and the worship team are going to lead us in worship. And it might be during that time you want to recommit to saying, God, I want you to be on the throne of my life. I want you to be the one that fills my affection, my devotion, my time, my energy, my finances. I want it to be focused on you. For some of you, you've never really thought perhaps that worship is a thing. And you might be saying, well, today I'm going to choose to begin to explore who God is and how I can have him as the center of my lives. And so I just want to finish with a single statement, again by Louis Giglio in that book, The Air I Breathe. And this is a statement. And off the back of that, we're going to have a chance to worship God in song. You can worship whatever you want. But whatever you worship, you imitate. And whatever you imitate, you become. Let me read that again. You can worship whatever you want. But whatever you worship, you imitate. And whatever you imitate, you become. I'll give you a moment to think through that, and then we're going to worship. And our worship team are going to lead us. And as we do that, maybe you want to make a recommitment to putting God as the first place in your life. But maybe for some of you are thinking, I didn't know that was a thing. And I want to be changed to become a better person. I want to be changed to become the person that God has made me to be. And so maybe today is a chance for you to start thinking through, I've got to make a choice to explore what does it look like to have God as the first in my life. So let us worship.